We continue on page 608, Tafresh Ches, Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 1. The mimer is Kiseitse. This is the 73rd mimer. Is that what it is? What number mimer is this? 74th. Mimer 74th. And it will be the beginning of chapter 300. Shin. So since he usually sums up, well, he will sum up in the beginning of the mimer the whole last mimer. I'll learn it inside and then I'll elaborate within the context. But we are in the middle of the subject matter, and of course this is one long discourse, but the Rebbe Rashab then added the beginnings and ends, but it continues the flow. The 4 types of dysfunctionality in Tohu, which you can say are 4 different types. You know, it's not clear whether they all 4 happen at the same time. They're usually not. But 4 ways that Tohu can be imbalanced. It's basically 4 ways where, 4 different ways that's possible that the imbalance between Ayin and Yesh, between Er and Keli, takes place. And he's going to sum up the 4, and I'll elaborate when we read it inside. And of course, this whole thing is setting the stage for Tikkun. What is the right balance? And as we spoke, this is like a tremendous formula for mediation, for shalom bayis, for any type of 2 forces that don't coexist. It's like a real formula, first of all, dissecting and understanding where the problem is. You know, it usually takes 2 to tango, so usually the problem is on both ends, but still where it originates. And then, of course, the issue of how to repair it. So let's begin here. We'll start from the beginning of the mimer, where here he starts a new mimer, and then goes back to where he continued, where he left off. So it's Kiseitse l'Mulchama, this is Kiseitse Tafresh Ayin Dalet. So in effect, this is really more than 2 years after the discourse began, the Hemshech. So the Hemshech began Shavuos Ayin Beis, which we're coming to now in the next few weeks. This is 100 years. So this is already 2 years and some months. It's the summer of 1914 here. Mm-hmm. But it's a continuation. It goes, Kiseitse l'Mulchama levecha, you'll go out to war on your enemies, upon your enemies, and Hashem, God, will give them to you in your hands, and you will take captives. You have to understand, what does it mean that Hashem will give them in your hands? The mashmo is loshen haftache. It appears to mean a promise, haftache. A guarantee, a promise, an assurance. Ma'u inyan haftachazu. What is the inyan? What is the meaning behind this assurance, behind this promise? Gam ma'u inyan v'shavisu shivya. Achish karom v'nosnu. What is the addition of this taking captives after you already said v'nosnu that I will give you them in your hands? So there's some additional emphasis. Not only will you win and conquer and win the battle, but you also take hostage, you'll take captives. V'hine b'medrash Rabbah pasuk say hilachem b'Amalek, the medrash Rabbah on the pasuk. They go out and wage war with Amalek, which is, by the way, the end of the pasuk. Kiseitse talks about Amalek. Isa mikan atolama shahoyu shruyim tachas anan hakovid. From this pasuk, it says say to go out. From here we derive that their Jews were shruyim, were lived, and they rested beneath the clouds of glory. The Ein would say because what does it mean to go out, to leave? What does it mean to leave? It means that before that they were inside somewhere. Where were they? So they were surrounded and covered by the Nani HaKavod, the clouds of glory. As the Jews, when they traveled through the wilderness, the clouds surrounded them. So that's what we learn from Kiseitse, from Say. Here the Rabbi Rashab is saying, if that's the case, same thing is here. That since it says She'emer Kiseitse l'Mulchama, you go out to war. The word Seitze implies they're going out from somewhere. Where are they going out from? From someone, from the place they were resting where they were living, where they were dwelling within. So we have to understand what is this union of dwelling within, and what is the thing of going out from within to war. Could have said kisilchem alevecha. The pasuk didn't have to say seitze. It says when you wage war. Seitze adds some type of emphasis on leaving an inner place to go to an outer place. We have to understand what that is. Okay, now he goes back. Remember, this whole first paragraph was written later when the Rebbe Rashab said the Mamorim, which was at a later stage. No one knows exactly where it was holding. In other words, where he was up to in writing, but definitely was up in writing far ahead of when he said it. In other words, he had written, but when he said it, he went back then and wrote afterwards the openings and endings and these summaries. So these summaries actually were not written while the actual Hemshech, so they're interesting because they're written at time later, so they give you sometimes new insights. It's like when summarizing something later, so sometimes an interesting perspective. I mean, it's very similar, but there are sometimes new nuances. Well, the Havin calls yesh lahagdim mashkin bar leil. To understand all this, we have to preface what we learned earlier, what we discussed earlier. What did we discuss earlier? That the union and the interconnectivity of the energies and the containers, in order for them to join, because they're opposites, going in opposite directions, as we've learned many times, repeated again and again, that is fundamentally ayin. Its nature is not itself, but to be a channel of its source, an extension of its source. So its fundamental nature is bittul, ayin. Like he spoke the three things. It's similar to its source, it's connected to its source, and wants to rejoin, wants to be resubmerged in its source. And Keli, its role is identity, the opposite, yesh. It has a personality. And both are, by the way, by divine. This is not their personal interests. This is the divine way of two ways of expression. One is and one is Keli. Keli is the parameters. So in a world like ours, for example, if we only had Eiris, we would not be able to transmit to each other, we'd never be able to receive from one another. A container allows you to take, let's say, wine from the source, put it into a cup, a kos, make a kiddush on it. Just to use a small example. Kelim allow you to take an idea that's abstract and find containers which are words and express it. I mean, there's millions of ways you can explain how this works. But Eir and Keli are the two key things in a world like ours. In a world lifnei atzimtzum, in Atzmus, obviously you don't need Eiris and Kelim, everything is one integral unity, and that's it. But to create a world like ours, which is what God wanted, Eiris and Kelim are essentially the way the structure of everything is. There's a recipient, there's a giver, there's a one that defines, one that transmits, and really need the flow of both. A teacher and a student, so the teacher is transmitting ideas, but it has to be done in Kelim that the student can receive. On and on. So these two are opposites. So the real challenge in the interface of Ayin Beis is how do these two meet? How do they meet? So it says fundamentally, the first thing you need is shemachlifim tivam pulasam. They have to exchange their natures and their functions. The be'etzem u'usam ahed b'chinas ayin. The fundamental nature of Eir is b'chinas ayin, like I just said. V'akelim b'chinas yesh. So how do ayin and yesh meet? Or you want to put it more in Avedidika terms, how does our ego meet selflessness? Self-interest. I'm interested in my own needs, in myself. How does that meet the place of serving something beyond me without compromising one or the other? It's one thing you can submit and put yourself aside, or you can be completely focused on self-interest, but we're interested in Eiris and Keli. We're not talking about that the Keli ceases to be a Keli. That one of the imbalances is where Nadav and Avihu, the Kelim disappeared. They got burned up. We're not talking about that. We're talking about how do they meet. So he says here, however, they exchange their natures and their functions. The Eir assumes a different posture. Instead of going ayin, it goes from ayin to yesh. It prepares itself. Sets itself aside to move into the yesh, into the container. Vakeli exchanges its personality with air by doing yesh line instead of just being a container into its own identity, its own itness. It becomes receptive, like he said. He empties himself. The keli empties itself, and prepares itself to receive the energy.
Is that natural, correct?
Yeah, this is natural. As he says, this is well, it's not totally not natural. Would be just they did that, but they have the ability on their own, without the other's influence. They have the ability to both do this. This is Eir and Keli on its own, as he explained. This
when we say peula, that's their doing, no?
Pool is their function. Pool is the difference between Teva and Pulosam is Teva is their nature, and Pulosam is their function. Obviously, their function follows their nature. I mean, it doesn't break it down. It simply would be the Teva of Eir is Ayin, and therefore its Pula is to go into its source. That's how I would say. The Teva of Keli is yesh. Yeah. And his Pa'ula is to receive and to stay in an identity. When they machlif their Teva and their Pa'ula, they both are changing, they both have the capacity to exchange their personalities. Remember, that's also part of their personality, they have that capacity. But it needs effort, because if they don't have any bittul at all, they're not going to do it.
That's the word, the effort.
Yeah. Hope it's not a problem.
Can you also use the case to pour into another? So in other words, it has that property to also give of itself.
It's true, but he doesn't really talk about this so much here, because this is more how the Eir and Keli like me. So bottom line is, like we talk with the wick and the flame. He's going to say, we're going to elaborate. The wick and the flame, the story is like this. The wick and flame, if they're not, on their own, you have a piece of matter, let's call that Keli, and you have a piece of flame, and you have flame. You want these two to meet. Now, obviously you have to ignite it, but I'm not getting into that right now. So you have to have that the wick has to do something to assume to be more edel, more refined, to assume a little more property. It goes from yesh to ayin. It's not so coarse. If it was coarse matter, it was a hard piece of, let's say, metal, it wouldn't be a container for flame. If the flame would remain in its sublime state, wherever the root of fire is, it wouldn't come down. So you need the flame to become more yesh as it moves closer to the wick. You need the wick to become more refined as it moves closer to the ayin, and then they can meet without annihilating one another. But there are four ways how this doesn't work right. And then you understand how it does work. It's much easier for it not to work than for it to work, because they're opposites. It's much more delicate. It's a delicate situation here. Now, with a flame and a wick is just an example. But like he brought, there's wicks you're not allowed to use on Shabbos for lighting candles, because they don't have the properties that are necessary. But obviously, the more complicated part is when it comes on the human level, where two people have two different agendas and two different interests. So, okay, so machlifim. And through this, we have this chabros, their fusion, their union, their connection, viskalos, and their interconnectivity. Remember again, he keeps talking earlier about two types of viskalos. One is that they're capable of connecting, and then the viskalos is when they really give and take from one another, real interconnectivity, where there's a total web, a symbiosis. It's like the human body or nature, where you can't even say that's two different ends. Everything works so well together, it's like a clock. It's all, a whole bunch of parts all working together. And since they're two opposites, and it requires this delicate balance, there has to be the proper meziga, the proper combination, the proper formula. Be'im lav or be'im loy, be'im lav, if you don't have the proper meziga, the proper combination, the proper synthesis, you're not going to have iskalos. In his boy, and he explains that
you might have Shabbos, but not Shabbos.
Even his Shabbos, but yeah, I understand he doesn't say Shabbos here, but definitely Shabbos. Yeah, right. There's be some type of something could happen, but it's going to be Yeah, I explained that when it's not proper, when it's not appropriate, this formula, there are four ways, there are four ifanim, four possibilities, the grusa, to the negative, four possible dysfunctionalities, four inappropriate or imbalances, four types of imbalances.
Maybe you have the DVD. It's making this.
Okay, ha'aleph, he's going to say the four now. He's summing up this whole last mimer, spoke about these four. Sha'er v'tachas ha'ayin, that the energy, the oir, is the ultimate ayin, ultimate substanceless. That's the word. Because ayin here is that. Okay. V'akeli b'tachas ha'yesh, and the container is an ultimate identity, it's ultimate self. So basically, they're both in their primary roles. Here he says his chabros can. But then there can't even be. There's no chabros at all. There's no connection between that. The example would be not a wick, but take a piece of metal and take flame. They'll never meet. Another one, they'll meet. Yeah, one could heat the other. But I mean, say this one, they never join as a wick to a flame. It's just not appropriate wick. But memadlikin, there are things you can use. There are things you can't use. It's not a keli.
You won't even get to first base.
Right, you won't get even to first base, exactly. Habeis, dysfunctional number 2, imbalance number 2, keshakeli yesh ayin Beis, that the container is excessively going from yesh to ayin. There, it's not even it's not at all a container. The example he gave would be a porous wick. Take not something that's cotton or fuel, but a thread. I'm just giving you an example. A thread, you light a thread, within a split second, it won't burn anymore. The keli is too much iron.
What would be a human?
There's no substance.
A human example would be where, let's say, in the mediation, where one person is completely dominant and the other one is completely submissive, and they get annihilated in the process. In other words, let's say a teacher is so overwhelming, the student is completely lost. There's no student there. There's no keli there. Or this example would be, I think this would be Nadav and Avihu. This would be the children of. This would be the three that went into the Pardes. Yeah, each in their own way. This is the Talmidei Rabbi Akiva. I mean, all the examples of where basically kelim were burned up, either because of the intensity of the oil, or because, or in this case, because the keli became too bottle. It's excessive bittul, basically. Thank you. Okay, that's number 2. I mean, context of Dirah B'Tachtenim, it's with Rashbi. He comes out 12 years after the cave, from the cave, and whatever he looks at begins to burn. The Eibishter says, no, the Shavis Yitzhara.
That's because of the intensity of the air.
Yeah, that's correct. In the Hanami, correct, right. Or it'd be the opposite, where, let's say, asceticism. In Aveda would be asceticism, where the Baal Shem Tov says, Kisira Chamer Senacha. You have to work with the body. So I'll say, you know what? I'm just going to sublimate myself. I won't eat. I'll fast. I'll punish my body. I'll punish the container. I mean, in other words, you destroy the container in order to benefit from the air. I mean, I'm just giving examples. It's not exact, but essentially, it's where the containers have become too porous. Hagimel, which he called the worst one, K'sha'eru ma'ayin liyesh b'yeser. The energy is overabundant or excessive, going too much to the yesh. V'akeli gam hi b'chinis yesh. And the container also remains in the yesh. This is the worst possible scenario. This is the worst extreme. The other extreme to the worst. As he explained, what is this? This is the state where he gave the whole last chapter, the whole thing with the Nephilim and the Erev Rav and the Gasei Ruach, the Azei Ponim. This is where the energy gets trapped in the world of the container. So the energy goes too much, manifests too much. It would be where the teacher goes so much down to the student, and the student completely is not receptive, and the teacher just keeps giving. I gave the example of the drowning victim. Someone's drowning, the lifeguard comes to save the person, and the guy schleps the person schleps the lifeguard down with him because of desperation. The bottom line is the example he gave also in the physical example would be a wick. In this case, would be a wet log, a wet piece of wood that's very wet, so it'll burn. It's not so wet that it won't burn, but it just burns, and the log never gets consumed. So the air is like excessively a yesh, and the yesh remains a yesh. The example, the nephilim, great souls that go into very coarse and gross bodies. This would be any scenario where there's a great energy completely abused or hijacked by a container. So when you see people, for example, with great talents, and they get unfortunately trapped in the worst possible things. So here is the opposite. Level 2 is the keli gets too porous and goes too much into the air. Here it's the opposite. The air is going too much into the yesh, and the yesh remains a yesh. I mean, these are the examples he gave in the previous chapter. The Nephilim, they were great souls. They're fallen. They were Anshe Shem. They were fallen angels. So there, in the spiritual world, it's fine. When they came down here, they became the worst of all. And he also gave the example of the Erev Rav, that by Matan Torah, when there was the whole fanfare, the fireworks, and so on, the Erev Rav, which is the keli, they got the upper hand, they used it, and they built the Chedegel, and they slept with that, the air
Is it because
of
the
the
air is so
Neshama
weak?
Yisrael of bittul.
Is it because the air is so weak, so it cannot transform the keli, or because the keli is so dominant that it
Well, it's really because
Overwhelms
both of
the
them are missing the point. They lost the kavanah.
really-
It doesn't say really. It doesn't say which one it starts. It's overconfidence basically. The air is maybe overconfident. It thinks it can do anything, and then it gets trapped. It's like somebody goes into shlosh klips at maze. He thinks he can elevate it, and then he can't elevate it because it's more powerful than him. I mean, remember, there's two ways to talk about this. You can talk about it personally, like in human interaction, or you can talk about it abstractly. Abstractly, it's more like in Tohu. What's happening is there's so much intensity. It's one chaotic world. It's like a world where everything is doing, there's no direction. So the areas can be intense. That's why all four really are possible. It's when there's an imbalance, it's just one big mess. Actually, you could even say that you have a situation where a person has all four in his life. They're probably interdependent, because if you're going to be one extreme, it's very easy to fall into the next extreme. Because there's lack of balance. The balance that he adds in Tikkun, he's going to say, the main balance is bittul. What's lacking is bittul here. So you have ayin, you have the personality of Eir wanting to be in its source, but you don't have the hanachas atzmusa, as he said, laying itself aside. Vadalad, in the fourth level of dysfunctionality, of imbalance. This is talking, as he said, now, the first three is in their preparation, how they are on their own. The problem. The fourth one is they have now yesh joined. They've already met. In other words, they've passed through. Let's make believe the first three did not happen. So you have an Eir and a Keli meeting. But here's the problem. So here you do have that they've both got through stage one, where they do, this one went ayin the yesh and the Eir, and the Keli went yesh ayin, but once they join, they're not in the proper formula. They're not in the proper measure. That they do not fulfill, that through them does not fulfill the higher purpose of true joining and union. So here would be basically, it's an actual wick, it's a flame, and they're burning, but the wick is let's say too short, or the flame is not strong enough. Whatever. I mean, you could find a whole bunch of scenarios, and this he says clearly. This is once they've joined already. So the proper iskalus will not take place. V'hatikun hu ayidei shema, and the repair for all of this is through shema. Shema is the shema of bittul. Remember, Tohu is ban, behema, ma is gematria adam, ma is bittul, chachma, koyach ma. Shu mibchinas atzmus ein sof, which comes from, it's rooted in Atzmus, the essence. Bittul b'zeh b'chinas hanochas atzmusei. What is it? This introduces the measure of placing yourself aside. It's not about you. Not about you, not the Eir, and not about you, not the Keli. Add that dimension in, and you begin to have the solution to these problems. That the container, the energy in the container should not be according to their essential nature, but they should be aligned to the higher kavanah. And I explained, let me just elaborate, this is a critical component. Let's talk about mediation. So you have a husband and wife, let's say, so a spouse, or you have other two partners or two people don't get along. And they're at war. You can't even get them together in one room. So comes a mediator and says to each of them what Aaron said. He said something good about you, she said something good about you, or whatever. He gets them into one room and says, do me a favor. Let's just sit in one room and not yell at each other. So that's, of course, stage one. Let's just tolerate. And let's see what happens. Now, right here, you could have 4 different scenarios of how this won't happen. Right? You could have either he or one stays in. Here, it's not necessarily Eir and Keli exactly, because you could say who's the Eir and Keli. It doesn't matter, but it's 2 entities. He stays in his intensity, she's in hers, and there's no meeting point. The second scenario is that one of them completely becomes so submissive, and the other one's so dominant, they lose themselves. That's also not an option, because then you don't really have a relationship. One is completely deferred to the other. The third scenario is where the opposite, where the Eir, the one that's supposed to be giving and transmitting, is giving and giving. Let's say one of them is abusive personality. And instead of, so you have to be kind, fine, but they're too kind. They're always finding excuses for the person. And in your good intentions, you end up getting trapped by the person. That's called an enabler, codependent. You find this, let's say, in scenarios where there's one partner is an alcoholic. And the other one, instead of expecting accountability, just feeds and always gives excuses and so on. And it also can all start in good intentions. It can also be overconfident. I'll save you. And you don't end up saving anything. So you end up a whole new problem. The fourth situation is they finally come together, but there's still an imbalance. One is demanding more, the one is giving more. And here, which at least you got to that level. But here, it's a more subtler problem, which is finding the perfect balance. What do you need to solve it all? Above all, you need Hanochas Atzmusei. As long as they're stuck in each one in their place, I want this. You did this. It's to me. You're not going to go anywhere. If both have bittul and say, you know what? I will remain. Remember, the Hanochas Atzmusei does not mean annihilating your being. It means introducing, in addition to who you are, also know that you want to be aligned to the kavanah. So the kavanah is not to say disappear. You don't have an ego, you don't have an identity. No. Eir has its identity, Keli has its identity. But add Hanochas Atzmusei into the formula, and now you have the ingredients for a happy marriage, for a happy union, for a real union, which is really the secret. How do you balance the identities, the different identities, with the bittul? And not that the bittul should annihilate. The bittul should blunt it, at least, what's the word for it? Blunt the edges. That it shouldn't be just the two forces like that. That's why you need the third partner in a shidduch. You need the chuppah, you need the transcendence, you need bittul to add that into the equation. So now, when the bittul is over excessive, it also is a problem. If one of them is annihilated to some extent.
Hanachat Smutu doesn't mean that he's putting his own personality on the side, because they won't be according to their own.
But he means not entirely according to their own. That's what he means. Left to their own, this one's a Keli and wants to stay in its yesh. This one's an Eir and wants to stay in its Eir. Hanochas Atzmusei is clearly not. First of all, that's why he said they both have the capacity for it. It's not something that has to be forced upon them. Mm-hmm. They have the capacity, but in order to bring out that capacity, they have to have some putting themselves aside. What it means here is to put part of yourself aside. That's what it means, obviously, because he doesn't want to have annihilation. That's the whole kavanah here.
But in the case of the marriage, the hurt, the anger, the resentment might still be there. It's just
let me put it this way: these two people
do for the family.
Yeah, Well,
It's a kavan al yin. That's in this case.
well, but you want it to be also kavan al yin, that you really want a real union, not just do it for family. Would be can encourage, can suggest
You want
just to put everything aside.
Continue.
No, but I want to say this. Remember, at the end of the day, the kavan al yin is that Eir and Keli should be at their best, not that they should be eliminated. Let's talk about these two people that we talked to mediation. The end of the day is they can complement each other. They will end up becoming stronger and greater as Eir and Keli. So Anochas Atzmusei is almost get yourself out of the way so you can really fulfill your real purpose. I mean, he doesn't say these words here, but there's no question that's the idea. In other words, the Kavanah El Yena, why did God create Eir and Keli? And we learned it earlier, because he wanted there should be Mashpia and Makabel, there should be a give and take. Each one has something to give to the other. Now, there can be a distortion. Once there's two entities, they could say, you know what, I don't need to give. Remember, Midas Dain. I'm me, you're you. I don't want to have anything to do with you. Which would seem to be, wow, that's great. You know, everyone is so self-contained, but that's not correct. You're not complete without the other. But you have become your worst enemy because you get in your own way because you decided, you know, I'm so much into myself. So Kavanah El Yena is meant to open up, you know, something. If you were giving to that and they would give to you and you would take from each other, you'll be more Eir and you'll be more Keli, not the opposite. But because God created a structure of duality, of different worlds, of different dimensions, there's a possibility where the air suddenly gets distorted and says, you know what? I just want to be air. I'm not interested in Keli. The Keli says, I want to be a Keli. I don't want to interested in the air. So Kavanah El Yena is correct. Hanochas Atzmusei is to put aside. Look, it's ultimately, at the end of the day, we're talking about an interface between something that exists and something beyond it. So you need to have some measure of you don't take away Anochas Atzmusei, there's no way they're ever going to join. Understand what I'm saying? But when they join, they're not joining in a way that is undermining them. It's going to ultimately enhance them. Remember, the Keli reveals in the air the true Kavanah, so the air suddenly senses Kavanah Atzmus. The air reveals to the Keli a bittul b'metzias that the Keli will not have on its own. That's ultimately, remember, that's what he said. The Keli on its own is only bittul yesh. The air introduces bittul metzias, a higher awareness. So the Keli is going to become far greater by joining with the air, and the air will be far greater by joining with the Keli. But it's almost they have to be told. It's like the drowning victim. The drowning victim just schleps down the lifeguard because they're desperate. If you could communicate to the drowning victim, say, you know what, if you didn't schlep him down, he'd save you, and you'd both be alive, and you'd both be great. But when you get caught up in your own world, air can get caught up. That's the air of Tohu. That's why you need Tohu, is where after the tzimtzum, once the Kavanah Yena has been concealed, and now we need Aveda to get back to it, Tohu is the dysfunctional possibility. That's why it's like a market correction. You need to have a world like that where things cannot work properly, so you should know what has to be done to make it work properly. Remember, Lifnei at Tzimtzum, there's no problems. Everything is all encompassed in underwater, you know, in the divine energy. The problem begins once there's the distinctions. There's a distortion. It's like God created me and you, right? So we could deceive ourselves into thinking, you know what? You're you, me, we become competitive. We start killing each other. The reason he created you and I is to realize that each of us can give something to the other, and together we can create a greater music. So we have two options. Hanochas Atzmusei does not mean that you're going to eliminate yourself. It means, one second, maybe I don't have it all figured out. Maybe there's something that I could learn from the other. That's really what it's doing. Because if not, it's one of the four dysfunctionalities. If it's not Hanochas Atzmusei, if it's just you're submitting to me because you're weak or because you're drained, that's not going to be good. Then it's not really you. We need you to be there.
The word hanach also means like lowering the nachas, no, from like relaxing. No?
Okay, I never thought.
In other words, that's what you're saying. That's part of that's being part of it.
Like Hanacha, when you wrote it for the Rebbe, Hanacha, that means you just put it down. You put yourself down.
Right, Hanocha means to commit. Sometimes to commit to paper. Hanocha means to lay it down. You know, Hanocha Nakira by Shabbos. You lift and you place down. But here it means to place yourself aside. So we continue. 300. So Shin, chapter 300. In this repair, there are two types, not two types, two elements. of tikkun, of repair. Ha'echad, the first one, is by eres hakelim mitzad atzmi. The first repair is the energies and containers on their own. Sha'er lo yih b'chinas ayin beis, v'yih be'efshel iskaber makli, makeli. The first is that the energy should not be excessive ion, excessive substanceless, and it should be capable, it should be possible for it to join with the container. And the container should not be excessive yesh, excessive self, itness, so it should be capable of being a container to the air, to the energy. So this is like the contrast, or the alter ego of tikkun to Tohu. In Tohu was the opposite. The possibility was that the air is going to be excessive ayin, and the keli will be excessive yesh, like in option 1, dysfunctional number 1. And in tikkun, no, the repair is that the air should be it should not be excessive, so it should be able to join with the container, and vice versa. And included in this one first element of tikkun is that the energy in the container should be relative to each other. They should be commensurate, measured in proper ratio to each other. That in direct proportion to the commensurate to the virtue and the strength of the energy, the ma'alas ha'er, the advantage of the energy, should be the container. So in other words, as he spoke earlier, that they respond to each other equally. Think of teacher and student. As the teacher gives more, the student is more receptive. If the teacher senses the student can't receive as much, he stops giving as much. That they're constantly measuring and balancing each other without one dominating and forgetting about the other. So this is also a part of this, that there should be this continuous measuring. You see the container is weaker, so the air goes a little slower. You see the container is stronger, the air goes more. You see the air is giving more, the container receives more. In other words, it needs a constant type of measuring of relativism to each other. V'atikkun Beis, and the second element of tikkun, of repair, hu bezeh shemachlifim shemischalfim p'ulei seim, is in this that they exchange their functions. Sha'eru ma'ayin liyesh v'akelim yesh la'ayin. That the air moves from ayin to yesh, yesh is keli, and a keli moves from yesh la'ayin, ayin is air. Sha'eru ma'ayin liyesh v'akelim yesh la'ayin, yizeh b'mezigah nechena, that this should be the proper formula, proper measure, proper combination. Miziga, you have another word for miziga? Synthesis.
Temperament.
Yeah, but here it's more than temperament, because temperament is, you mean mizug of two ingredients.
To be able to,
The proper combination. Okay, yeah, there's a kind of alloy in chemistry. An alloy is when you take two things, they become.
Make them stronger.
Yeah, aligned to the true kavanah, intention, the divine intention. That through this there should be their joining and their interconnectivity. The question is, what's the difference between
it's almost the same thing.
One second. No, he's not for sure. It's not. But
I think
one
he's going
second.
to say it now.
Yeah. Just a second. I know the difference because from what he said before, the first one refers to the 3L is the counter force to the first three dysfunctionalities, and the fourth one is once they joined. That's probably the difference.
But I think he did the next 2-3 lines.
The tikkun aleph hu shemeshanim tivam. In the first element of repair is that they actually change their natures. The teva atzmam hu sheiru b'chinas ayin v'akeli b'chinas yesh. Their essential nature is that energy and light is ayin, has no substance. V'akeli b'chinas yesh, and keli has substance. V'atikkun hu, and the repair is shemeshanim tivam. They actually changed it. The tikkun repairs that they changed their nature. Sha'er lo yih b'chinas ayin beis, that the energy should not be excessive in its own nature, which is ayin, substanceless, that's no substance. And the container should not be excessive yesh, excessive substance. So they're Meshana, the word is Shinui Teva, they changed. V'hatikun habeis, hu shemeshanim pulei seir. So Teva and Pula, that they changed their functions. She'eru ma'ayin le'yesh v'akelim yesh la'ayin b'mezigin nechen. That the air goes from substanceless to substance, and the container from substance to substanceless. The mezigin nechen are a proper combination. It's interesting because I would have. We'll read on because I don't want to come to any conclusions. I just want to say one thing before we go further. No, it's definitely going to get clear because he probably has to bring together many things here. Even though he's going to start, you can avoid it. He clearly stated at the end of last chapter, in chapter 299, that the first three are the Eretz Kelim on their own. The first three dysfunctionalities. And the fourth one is when they Mashamachlif and Pulasem. So I think he's referring to the same thing. See, look at the parentheses in Tafresh Vav.
Look at that in Mashamachlif.
Yeah. Yeah. So you see clearly that he's referring. It's the same. It's just different issues. That's where you need this to understand it well. But what I would say is the following. You remember we discussed this. The interesting thing is back, if you remember, where was the thing with the two types of iskalos?
I think it's the mashal that he bought with the case, that it has the Chitzani Sakeli and the Pnimi Sakeli. The function.
No, I'm not talking about that one second.
Is that the beginning of it? Or something? No?
Well, in the summary, in Sheftim, the beginning of Sheftim, it's there. Okay, here we are. Top of Tov Kuf Tzadik Zayin, 597. He says,
The top line.
yeah, no, just one second. So he says that if you remember, there's two types of iskalos. Iskalos as is based in yon. Mashat b'chol mida nimtza mida hofchim. Top of the 597. So k'mekem be'eres v'kelen beis min iskal echad u'b'chinas bittul b'chlal ba'eli is b'efen kazeh sheyuchel bi b'chinas eslapshus b'kelen chen bittul ha'keli. So they leave room for one another. And be'abei is b'chinas bittul b'keli she'adei esh b'chinas bittul ha'mitah and bittul yichudah. In other words, there's something that they have. There's two scholars. One is that Er and Keli have something on their own, without any need for the other to remind them, that prepares them to meet the other. And then there's something that each one adds to the other that they don't have on their own. And I explained that you need both in the interface because you need the Keli. You can't have just the Keli receiving bittul from the air. The Keli has to have some bittul of its own. It has to be prepared to receive the bittul of the air, which makes it then the interface, remember, has to be such that both entities are joining in the process. So there has to be something that each one has on its own, and there's something that each one doesn't have on its own. And that's where it can get confusing, because you could think, 1 second, if it doesn't have it on its own, then it's annihilating it. No, because if it has a little bittul on its own, if Keli had no bittul at all, you wouldn't have dira b'tachtem. You wouldn't have an interface. So the Keli has some bittul of its own, like he says, that when you prepare yourself to receive. But then you receive something you don't have on your own.
Where's that bittul from? The Shadish, because of its Shadish.
Because of its Shadish, and yes, because it has the Kavan El Yain in it somewhere, and also to become part of its nature, yeah. Right.
That's why the Neshama can only go into a body of a human being and not into a behemoth.
Correct.
Because the Keli has the bittul.
Okay. And then there's the second level of scholars where they actually, but the first one, they only ready to join. If you want total symbiosis, total achdus, their total fusion happens only on the second level. That's the real hiskalos. So he's saying in the first one, there's three possible dysfunctionalities. the three ones he spoke about, where this one's too ayin, this one's too yesh, one. This one's too much ayin, the keli is too much ayin, and the third one where the air becomes too much yesh and the keli remains yesh. Then when they do, and therefore obviously they're not going to join. Then when they finally do join, let's say they don't have those three problems, and they do meet. The question is, if they're not in the mizig and the chena, they're not going to really experience each other properly. So the fourth one requires that. So what he's saying here is that the two types of tikkun are in these two levels of iskalos. The first one is regarding how they are in their own state. So there they need to be mishana some of their teva. He doesn't mean mishana teva here that they become something else. He means mishana teva that they need to set aside, they need to receive from one another. So they need to approach one another.
They need to be open to change.
Correct. Exactly. Vatikan Beis is Mishana Pula saying. Once they've already done that, now they change their functions. That the Eir moves toward Yesh, and Yesh moves toward Eir, and that's when you have this joining together. So in the first one, it's still that they have that on their own. It's an interesting thing that's throwing me a bit is because in the beginning he said the first one is what they have on their own, that they're ready to receive from one another.
This is also
And that would be more natural to them. And the second one is what each one adds to each other. Here he's calling the first one Shinui Teva, the other one and the second one Shinui Pu'ula. Okay.
also, I think the key word is mizig and chayna, the second one.
Yeah, but you see in the first one, if you look, okay, you're right. The mizig and chayna, because in the first one it just says they should be be'erech zelazeh. So if erech malazeh tiakli, that they should be commensurate to each other. But the miziga happens only in the second one, really. Yeah, correct.
Once they did meet each other, you need to correct miziga first to fulfill kavanah al-yom. The first one is that they haven't met each other.
In the beginning of chapter Resh Tzadik Vav, he says the ikers they should be l'shesiv l'sigra. They should be. It should be not more, not less.
I think taking the base is once they're connected.
One second. I think it's very important also to go back to chapter 296, because there he speaks where he begins. So he speaks about how these different levels, hu madrega adalat sheis boyer, and then he speaks about zayin skalas habeis. Look like 7 lines from the bottom, where he says v'chen li beibchim zmayim yeshel yesmer zayin zayin ukmeshiz boyer zayin skalas habeis hanal. I just said okay.
Parentheses.
Yeah, the parentheses. Okay, yeah, it's clear that there's the two types of iskalus. One is when they're own before they actually meet. They're ready to meet each other. There's 3 types of dysfunctionality there, and that's where tikkun is shinui tivam. They need to, because let's put it this way: there's 2. Let's say in the mediation, these 2 people, if they're not in the same room, you got to break that resistance. So they have to have certain shinui teva to be able to just say, you know what? I'm in a mode of ayin, I'm in a mode of yesh. I'm going to get into a mode of preparing to meet a yesh, and the yesh is getting the mode to prepare the ayin, to meet the ayin. That's in stage one. That's the tikkun. It has to be commensurate to each other. And can be an imbalance between yesh and ayin, the three different ways. And the tikkun beis is once they join, that there has to be the true union, the true maziga, the proper formula for the total union and interconnectivity, where the air is moving toward yesh and the yesh and the ayin and the keli toward ayin. But here it's not just in the preparatory stage that the energy is starting to move to yesh and keli to ayin. They're actually changing their functions, where they actually are they're really what's the word for it? They're joining forces. They're both functioning like the other one would function.
Each one understands the other's opinion.
Yeah.
They're moving closer to their opinion.
Exactly. Whereas the first one, you only have that they've changed their nature to begin to the journey, to begin the journey, the first step. Okay. He's bringing it all the way back. And this is what we explained earlier in chapter 251 and on. Wow. That goes back. Let's see.
50 chapters ago.
Yeah. Yeah, the point there was that they need to have two elements. Remember, Tohu is no tolerance for one another, and there's no giving and taking. So the Eiros of Tohu are problematic because they don't tolerate one another. They're too intense. And the Kalim of Tohu, the problem is that they don't give and take from one another. And in Tikkun, that's repaired. That's what's Reishon Alav Eilach. Yeah. So he's connecting it back. He's basically tying all the strings of the last 50 or more chapters. So this is what we explained earlier, then chapter 251 and on, the Iskalos Esesphiras, in the interconnectivity of the 10 spheres, sheyesh b'zeh in yanim. That this has within it two things, two elements, two components. The first is the weakening of the emotions on their fundamentally. The weakening of their nature, that they should leave room for one another. Because emotions on their own, left to their own recourse, their own accord, they're just intense. Love, discipline. An emotion by nature is an intensity. It's impulsive and intense. So the first step, as he discussed there at length, is the weakening of the emotions. Like I mentioned, the two forces that don't get along. First thing is, we got to weaken it. We got to get you to tolerate each other, to get into the same room. And the second is what they receive from one another. Because you can't receive from one another until you tolerate one another. Once that's weaker, if you remember the whole process, he spoke about how Moichin weakens the Midas. I don't know if you were in the classes, but basically the whole process that in Tikkun, the Moichin, as a child is very intense. So it cries, it laughs. Moichin begins to temper the Midas. And say, you know what? Something upsets you. Don't burn up. It's not Meichin. Patience. And once there's patience, the Moichin begins to train the Midas to coexist with others. That's why it says in Chassidus that with Das you can coexist with an opposite. In the Noach, in the Teva of Noach, was a taste of Mashiach's times. Mala Oris Deis Hashem Kamayim Liyamachas. So what does it say in the beginning of the pasuk? Lo Yereyu v'lo Yashchisu b'chol ha'kodesh. What does one thing have to do with other? Knowing God, what does it have to do with no destruction? Because it's Das. Das is v'kor Zevim Keves. Opposites can coexist when there's Das. Because Mechin creates a certain maturity. I'm able to tolerate. Doesn't mean you agree, but you're able to. You don't get overwhelmed by it. So in the Tevis Nech, it says it was a ha'ara of that. That's why the animals were able to coexist with each other. So the idea is that Mechin, that's what he explains there at length. That's how the process works. How Mechin sublimates, tames the midas, and then the goal is Mekabim Zemezeh, where the real symbiosis takes place, where they actually give and take from one another. And the same thing is the two repairs that he just said here. So those are the two things. Yeah, it's very clear now. One is an element of tolerating And there you need shinui teva, which is like chlishus teva, what he's saying here, weakening it. And the second is that they begin to their functions, they begin to replace each other's functions by the give and take.
Not only do they tolerate each other, but they also work together.
Yeah, right. Very good. Tevam is more setting the stage, the tone, be prepared. It's a mindset. It's a mindset or a heart set. And Pulesim, now that you can actually work together, exactly right. And then Chesed and Gvura and everything starts interconnectivity. And the same thing, all these forces, Er and Keli, begin to actually work well together.
But in order for them to tolerate each other, they have to have some sort of connection. That's also the word.
Yeah.
You can't just take two opposites and...
Yeah, that's why he said on their own, they have to have, in other words, if a Keli couldn't fundamentally become a wick to a flame, he's going nowhere. It has to be...
a person and an animal. There's no connection. You can put them in
a
room, they won't tolerate. It's not like there's any...
Correct. Yeah. That's absolutely right. Well, that's why Gashmi Sa'elam has to have somewhere a receptivity to Ruchnis. If it wouldn't, it would be they would clash. That's when matter and spirit could meet. That's the whole point. Because matter is not airtight and locked, and Ayin is not airtight. There's a place where there is an opening for each one.
Because the source of the matter is spiritual.
Correct.
So that's why
the source is because this kavanah above is because God didn't create it. God created in a way that they were airtight and it was closed. It would be like two things that never can meet. They would be never a place to meet. It's not the way. Okay. The Yuvin's the neshamas shebegufim. We'll understand this as it is neshamas, souls inside bodies. It's known the whole adam lamati yesh bebchinas. It's known that each person below has within him ban. Remember, ma was tikkun and ban is Torah.
Oh, this is not easy.
The neshama.
That's the ultimate mashal. The neshama could fit into a body, but it cannot fit into a behemoth.
Yeah. The neshama is the level of ma, v'aguf, and nefesh hativis, and the natural soul is ban. Natural soul is the soul that gives life, biological life. The ma gematria, Adam or ban gematria behem. Ma is gematria, the same numerical equivalent of Adam, of human. Well, ban gematria behem ban is 52. That's 45, and 52 is the numerical equivalent of an animal. Who inyan v'zerati is beisisro zer Adam v'zer behem. This is what it says. V'zerati is beisisro. I planted, I sowed the house of Israel. Zer Adam, a seed of man. Of a human, Zera Behem, and a seed of an animal. Zera Adam, Zera Adam, the seed of human, is the divine soul, the Sharshem, Adam Elim Shala Kisei. Its root is the supernal man that sits on the throne. Remember, the throne is Bria, Adam Elim is Atzilus. And the animal soul, its root is from the Sheir, from the animal, in the higher chariot. So there's the four faces of the chariot that Yecheskel saw. Right? So it's Pnei Nesher, Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Sher, and Pnei Odom. The Eimer and he said, V'zarati, I have sowed, I have planted. Kamoyu Neshamas Ani Asisi. This is like in Tanya also brings in the beginning of chapter 1, that there's the two souls. From the Neshamas Ani Asisi, it says plural. Souls I have
is that the emphasis?
Created.
Ayin
Beis neshamas anal. No, it's both. Sisi is both.
Zerati, no? Sisi.
Okay, maybe both, but Vimral Zerati, Ukamin neshamas an Yasi. And Sisi is like Zerati, but also neshamas is plural. Ayin Beis neshamas anal. These are the two souls above. V'hem b'chinas ma ban. That's the levels of ma and ban. The human and the animal. L'chein hanefesh l'kisu b'chinas ayin bittul be'etzem b'husei. And that's why, because nefesh l'kisu is ma, which is bittul ayin. So it's a level of ayin and bittul be'etzem. Fundamentally, it's not about itself, but about its source. That it's fundamentally selfless, suspends itself. Be'etzem Hussein, its fundamental nature, its fundamental personality. Yesh being that it is fundamentally divine. That's why it's ayin. It's a level of ayin. The yesh teva aliyah. So besides it having its nature, it's ayin. Also, its personality is ayin. It's mahus. It has also the nature of aliyah. It elevates. It transcends. The soul is restless, always looking upward. Like it says, the spirit of the Adam, of the human,
It's naturally
ascends upward. Yeah. So ruach adam can mean the breath, but but it means that we look upward.
spirit.
Yeah. Its flames are flames of fire. Sorry. Its flames are flames of fire, like flames of a torch. The divine soul is like a flame, that rises steadily, always, consistently, constantly. Like a flame is rising, so a soul is always rising. A soul is always looking upward, transcendence. Hagam shaneshamas kvar yotzu v'nifredu ma'kelim. Even though the souls have already left, have already exited yotzu, have
Emanated.
separated, or yotzu went out of,
Emanated.
departed, not emanated.
It went out.
Yotzu. You mean, that's why Hatzilu.
Yeah. So
No, but Yatsu is also departed. They've like left. They've gone out of the nifridu, are separated from the containers. Ma'kelim. Like it says in Tanya Geras Hakodesh 20, the chapter 20. And even more, and for sure, that they're distant from the kav, which is the original ray of light that comes after the tzimtzum. And this is true even about the souls of Atzilus, like he says in the Geras Hakodesh. He's asking a question essentially. You just said Nefesh Elokis is its nature, its personality is Ayin, and its nature is to constantly be like a flame that reaches upward, licks upward. So even though the souls, as they come down, already are outside of the containers and separate from them, even souls of Atzilus. Nevertheless, generally speaking, the souls have a nature of aliyah. Why klolos? Okay, it means to say all souls, even the souls of biyah, the fishehem mekom makom elikus. Because at the end of the day, after all, even if they've come out of the containers and they're distant from the kav, they still retain their personality, which is they are divine. The gam neshama is the biyah in elikus be'etzem husam. Also, souls of biyah, bri yitzir and asiyah, are also divine in their fundamental personality. Alken yesh b'hem tev aliyah ve'iskalus. That's why they have in them the nature to ascend, transcend, and to salus, to be submerged. See, here Iskalus is not the same. Iskalus before is interconnectivity of Eir and Keli. Here Iskalus means that they should be included into their source. And this element of nature of going upward and joining its source is understood in souls even more than it is in the supernal light, in the light above. Because neshamas are actually one, are actually the same matter. They're made of the same material, so to speak, of their source. They are one. They are the same.
They're essentially the same as the source.
Yeah, they're essentially the same as the source. They're mahu. They're their essence. And their essence is their source. When it comes to light, they're not like air, like energy or light, which is only a reflection of that. Like sunlight, you don't say the light of the sun is the sun. It reflects the sun. It's only about the sun. It's me'ein hamoyer. Neshamas are the essence. How do you say mechusa essence? The essence of the essence.
Essentially,
their essence is the essence.
They're essentially the essence.
Now they're not the full etzem, because obviously atzmus is, but they are a part of it. Like he said earlier from the Baal Shem Tov, that the teif is miktzas min etzem and the teif is kulei, that they are part of the essence, and when you have part of it, you have all of it. And that's why they have a nature of elevating, ascending to Atzmus. Hagam sheyotzav v'nifradu, even though they, as I said before, yotzav v'nifradu ma'kelim, that they went out of and they separated from the containers. Since they're part of the Etzem, eich shenema, however you interpret it, b'sherish and neshamis, however you'll interpret and explain that they're part of the Etzem, the root of the souls. Im mina eir or l'maylam izeh. He's now going back. In other words, in general, eir and neshamis have the same idea. They're both ayin, they both go to their source. But in truth, neshamis, you can understand it even more because neshamis are their source and not just a reflection of their source. So now he's going back. So even though they come down into bodies and they've already separated from the containers and they're distant from the kav, but because they're part of the etzem, the essence, however you interpret it now, whether the source is from the energy or it's higher than it, like we just said, however you interpret it, meaning it's not relevant to the issue. That they're actually part of the essence. They're part of the etzem, which means part of the divine above. So it's interesting. In other words, you could tie Sheresh Neshamas comes from the Eir, even though really the Neshama itself is part of the etzem, but it's revealed through the Eir. But the bottom line is, now, however you interpret it, exactly how that Sheresh manifests, at the end of the day, it's part of the etzem, and therefore it has that nature. And that's where they have the nature of ascending toward Atmos. They're searching. Let's explain what means for a moment transcendence. Very simply put. I use this example because it's very, very easy to understand it. The difference between an animal and a human being, physiological. An animal, like the Friedrich Rebbe says, never saw heaven. An animal, its face is toward the ground. Literally, it breathes downward. And even a giraffe still walks on all four, fine. Now, a human being, we walk upright. So your head is the highest part. Your head is not equal to your body and to your back. We walk upright, which means we have the ability, sumar menechem, we look up. I mean, even physically, we see the sky. A behemoth came on the Shemayim Nishgizan. That's what the Friedrich Rebbe says. An animal never saw heaven. Could it look up technically? Yes, of course it can look up. But naturally, why is it made? It's made because its main thing is earthy, to see the grass below, even scientifically, and see its needs. A human being has the capacity to see more than himself and others, looks up. Look physically, because we see the sky and the heavens, we've built $1 billion NASA just to satisfy one thing, curiosity. What's going on out there? Animals don't care. Animals have not changed their lives. They live in the same caves, the same lands. We've looked to improve our lives. Because our soul, our human soul, it's not just our eyes look up, his soul looks up. We're curious. We want to know, and we conquer. And we want to make things better. And we want to improve our lives. We don't want to live in the same caves like 500 years ago. We want better technology, better improve our lives. I'm talking about even with Gashmis. I'm not even talking about Ruchnis. Of course, we also have transcendent Ruchnis. The point is, we have the capacity to look up. You know the story with the Tzemach Tzedek. He's playing on a ladder with other children. So all the other children were afraid to climb to the top. He climbed to the top. His Alter Rebbe asked him, why were you the only one that climbed to the top? So he said, Pashut, they did. Grandpa. The other children, when they climbed, they looked down. So they saw how high they were afraid to go higher. I looked up. So I saw how low I was. It motivated me to climb higher. So we have both parts in ourselves. We look up, you want more. You look down, you're satisfied. And the spirit, the human spirit is restless like a flame. It's always looking up. Now obviously we have also Nefesh Habamis that grounds us. So Nefesh Habamis pulls us down to our survival, to our needs. But the soul is transcended by nature. And we just explain why. Because the soul is like the flame. The soul is like fire, like the light. Even more, the essence itself and its nature. Even when it comes down, it retains that personality. And never and does not compromise it. That's why you have to tell the soul, we compel you to go down. This is said every second. The soul has to constantly be told. Because it's not its nature to be grounded. Which is one of the reasons why in Tohu and these great neshamas burned out. Because they just they allowed their soul, Chlass HaNefesh, to take over the Meraglim. They wanted to stay in the Midbar, in the wilderness. The other souls, they want to stay. They want to connect, and as a result, their bodies are compromised. The kelim are compromised. The nefesh habamis ubchinas ruach habehema yiredes lamat ubchinas yeshes v'chumis. And the nefesh habamis is the opposite. It's the spirit of the animal that descends downward into what? Yeshes v'chumis, into its ego and its grossness, its coarseness. The Yordan neshama, now he goes. Okay. The Yordan neshama v'neslap shebeguf v'nefesh habamis. And now the soul descended and manifested and got dressed into the body and nefesh habamis and the animal soul in a way that they should be joined and they should be interconnective. And that means that the divine soul, even though it's nature, even though it is in a state of elevating upward, ascending upward, that this divine soul, who is fundamentally elevating, ascending upward, should change that and should go down, opposite of its nature. It should manifest in the animal soul to give it life, sustain it, and to radiate and illuminate it. Remember, air has to illuminate. It's not just that air should go there and get stuck. You want the air to retain its nature of air even when it's in the keli, because it has to serve as air. Remember, we spoke about the third type of dysfunctionality, where the air loses its power because it's now become completely trapped and consumed by the yesh. That's why la'ire. V'nefesh habamis, and the opposite is also true. V'nefesh habamis is bittul, and nefesh habamis, which is the animal soul, should be in the level of bittul. She keli klila nefesh alikish. It should be a container, a receptacle for the divine soul. The kabel eire or lichis memenu, to receive its air, its energy, and to be sustained by it, to live through it, from it, through it. Yesh bar kovazeis in shamaguf shein ayin yesh ma'aban kol adal defanim manam. And in this hakova, in this combination, in this convergence of the body, soul and body, which is ayin v'yesh ma'aban, it has all the four different.
That's the mashal that I thought of originally when we were learning it in the shaman body.
Yeah, has all four options, has all four. What they find in types, components, possibilities. So now the four. Aleph shaneshama b'shashim b'chinas ayin u'ma b'mayli yiseda. First is the neshama in its source, which comes from ayin u'ma b'mayli yiseda in a very exalted way. Because its source is that way, that it's so intensely ayin, bittul, and lack of substance, therefore also when it comes down into the body, it doesn't get concealed in the body and the animal soul, and nefesh comes through his galus, and the divine soul remains revealed. The kavanah here, the intention here is not, we're not talking about these exalted or these high souls that are not, these lofty souls that are not not grasped.
Trapped.
They're not trapped. More than trapped. It's not trapped. They're not. They don't manifest at all in the geshem, in the physical. The neshamas elu she'ein mitfasim b'geshem. These souls that don't manifest in the geshem, in the material. Gamma geshem shalom ein b'chinas geshem. Sheyayel v'yaftel neshama. Such souls, even their geshem, even their physical, is not really true. Is not true matter the way we understand it. That should conceal and hide the soul. Like we learned in chapter 298. Like the guf of Moshe, the soul of Moshe. The soul of Moshe has become so refined, not like the porous wick in functional number 2.
Body of Moshe.
I'm sorry, the body of Moshe has become so refined through his Aveda. Not like the pores that the wick is no longer a wick. But now his body has become similar to his soul. So these great neshamas, that's not what he's talking about. Who's divine, who retain their divine nature that does not get concealed in the body. That's because their bodies themselves are no longer like a regular body. V'kana kavana. Here we're talking about the first of the 4 options. Here the kavana has been a shamash and tfasim b'geshem. We're talking about not such great neshamas like that. They're so great that also their bodies are so much more refined. We're talking here neshamas that do manifest in Geshem, in the physical. Because they are such a high level, in the level of ma, of bittul. Even though they manifest in his body, in the lower body, nevertheless, the nefesh elokis, the divine, remains very galus, revealed. I'm not sure. Is this a good thing or not a good thing? Is it a dysfunctional thing or not? Because I was thinking it's like this. No, because you could say this. The first of the four is the soul is too strong for the body. Anyway, let's see what he says. Now the inyan of this is explained. The truth, the air of Shema, the energy of Shema, is not capable. It's not possible. How could you that it should be concealed and hidden? Because it's an essential energy, essential life. A true air atzmi, like for example, the sunlight. Sunlight is not an air atzmi. What do I mean by not air atzmi? It's a reflection of the sun. It's a reflection, nothing more. And therefore it could be blocked. Clouds can block it. You can block it out. Air atzmi, it has like a neshama, like you said, a neshama is etzem. A thing that is an etzem, you can't just conceal, because if it's just air, so concealment cancels out air. But atzmi in the air, being that it has a fundamental nature in it, does not receive a lamas v'estadim. The lamas v'estadim shaykh rak ala ha'ora. Concealments and coverings are only possible on a reflection. Because it's an external reflection. Avlal er atzmi, a fundamental energy in a shaykh halamas v'estadim. You cannot apply to it any concealments and coverings. Since neshama is the level of ma, adam, and it's a fundamental energy, it's not a reflection alone, not capable. You can't say that it could be concealed. And we see, the fact is, I mean, did you have looked at it, right? We all see that the soul does get concealed in the body and the animal cells. Oh man, that's because the ma within the soul came into a level of concealment. What does this mean? He just said it can't get concealed.
The bittul part of it, maybe.
Well, let's see. Look, we got to learn this. This is commotion is Barlil Perikresh Ayin Aleph, like we explained in chapter 271. But Prokim Shachris, and the chapters afterwards. Let me just go there. I just want to see how everything is being tied together, man alive. In that Halton cup.
Ping pong.
In that Halton cup, we're going to do. Oh, the Metzach. The Metzach piece. The Etzen. Okay. Yeah. What we learned there, beginning Bekia Shema, in the remember Bekia, what do we say? The Bekia. We said more than with Bekia. Piercing. The piercing of Shema that it breaks through like the barrel. Shema she'im Bekia Bekia Masalim im yesh etzem Bekia. He spoke there like what we see the light on the face, that the face is a glow,
That's
forehead is a glow from the etzem. So it's a glow from the etzem, but it's also concealed. You can't see the etzem. In other words, what he's saying here, you cannot conceal. An outside force cannot conceal er atzmi. An outside force can conceal a reflection. Like reflection of the sun, yeah, it's just like it comes. You can conceal it, you can block it, pull down your shades, your clouds, etc. Atzmi, nothing outside can conceal. No force can come and stop it. But it itself can stop itself. That's what he says, Shema, that the Shema itself can be Salmus. Not that something conceals it. That itself can express itself in a concealed form. And he's giving the example that we learned earlier, that the Kiyah Shema, When it breaks through, it's coming from the etzem, but it's in a concealed way. Like, for example, you see on the forehead a shine, a glow. It's glowing from the etzem, but you don't know what it is. It's completely concealed. That's where he spoke, for example, he spoke the opposite. Dibur reveals more, but it's from a less, it's not an etzem. When you speak, when a teacher speaks, in the words, you're going to have more ideas. In the forehead, you're only going to see a glow. But the glow reveals more of his etzem than the words do. Because the etzem broke through, but it broke through in a concealed fashion. Even though the etzem is big, but the etzem is able to conceal itself. And his Barasham, the Kamoikim ben Neshamis, explained there, the same thing is with souls. To the fact that they transmit, they're transmitted from the union of Zon Malchus, the Midas and Malchus. Mis'alam b'chinas masha behem. Their shema is concealed within them. And that's why they can be concealed in the animal soul. In other words, like this, very simple. A malach cannot conceal himself. If a malach comes down to earth, that's his thing, his revelation. And etzem has the power to conceal itself. Look, atzmus. What do you need more? So atzmi nothing can conceal it, but it can conceal itself. Basically. So it's more like a fundamental concealment. It's not because cheshech is more powerful than it, because it itself has the power to withhold part of itself. And that's why it gets concealed inside the body. Wow, this is interesting. We think that the body and soul, God made it in a way that it conceals the soul. He's saying really that it's an etzem.
He means in the case of parser. No, the parser is like that what conceals it.
Well, it sounds like the ma itself is concealed. It conceals itself.
Because
it expresses itself in a concealed way. Listen, let's continue. It needs explanation, obviously, but it goes back to those chapters before. So that's just it. Remember, all this is coming to explain option one. The neshama is revealed more than regular. Yeah.
And we don't know if it's a good thing or not yet.
Yeah. So now, even when the neshama gets concealed inside the nefesh bamis, does not mean it's fundamentally concealed, because we just said the nefesh bamis doesn't really conceal it; it's concealed itself, and therefore, when it's inside the body and nefesh bamis, you don't see it. But it does not mean it's fundamentally concealed. Its energy fundamentally, essentially, never truthfully, in truth, was concealed. Like it explains elsewhere the difference between the sparks of Tohu and souls. The sparks of Tohu, of the world of chaos, that fell, like we learned in the previous chapter, that fell during the shattering of the containers. Remember, he explained that tzutzis, the shattering is because the air itself is also a form of yesh. Yeah. So what's the difference? These sparks from Tohu that fell in the shattering, their energy is concealed. It's concealed also when they fall and they enter into klipas nega, which means, let's say, into the food or into the things that are different shus, everything in this world that has in its sparks, divine sparks, that are not air at all. They conceal those sparks. Those sparks are concealable. That's even in klipas nega.
That's from air, not from etzem.
Right, exactly. That's what he's going to say. It's the tzutzis, yeah. And for sure, so much more so when they fell into sholosh klipas atmeis, which are the really evil, negative parts. Ein b'hem tev klal, they have no good at all. In other words, things that are absolutely prohibited and so on. Like he says in Tanya, they have no good at all, but after that, someone explains they don't have good on their own. There's a spark there too. But it's dark. It says the Rebbe Rashab explains the spark became so dark like chatich and nas in the vela. Became so darkened like a black hole where you can't even see light anymore. But there is, so it's definitely gotten concealed. That's what I'm explaining. It's not like the spark disappeared.
You just said it, yeah.
Oh. The be'emes ef she'ein b'em teiv. You can't say they have no good. How are they sustained? The good is no longer apparently good. Means it's not good. It means it's no longer a revelation. Later in Ayin Beis, he says it's like the air became, so the air became a chatich nas in the veil, or it says other expressions. In Padr Shalom, Ayin Hey. That mimer we had it before, so I know it. Okay, so that means it doesn't have any good klal. That means revealed, revelation.
Could that be awakened again? No.
It could be through tshuva. Yeah, absolutely. You can't go there, but through tshuva, shvirosnu zeh takanosun, and the spark.
Take out
And they take out the spark, and that spark goes even higher than the regular aveda. Mashenke ben neshames kamash and neshama neifelas achman litzlan. Wow, this is strong. The mashenke neshames souls. How much a shama may fall, God forbid. I feel a beglim klipsat meis, even when it falls into gimel, the three negative evils.
What does that mean? What does that mean by pashas?
1 second. Ein misalemes legam does not completely get concealed. Before he said ein misalemes klal, I just ein misalem be'emes, ein misalem shemisalem be'esim. 1 second.
Before he said Einim Salam Be'emes.
Be'emes, okay. Does not get completely concealed. Shaloi tiyeh b'chinas er klal, that it should lose its personality of light. It's still er, not like in Gimel Klipsat Meis, but it's very concealed. In the garments of the animal soul, and to the point it doesn't even is not capable. It's not.
Doesn't have a spiritual sensitivity.
What is shaykh? How do you say shaykh? Not shaykh. It's not capable. It's not related to any form of feeling, anything of divine.
Spiritual sensitivity.
Spiritual sensitivity or divine, any inyan eliki, anything of divine.
Right.
And very distant. Nevertheless, it fundamentally is not concealed. Be'etzem now he says. He said emes, legamri now be'etzem. Let's read it and we'll explain. And in this itself, there's yeshkelukim madreges b'neshamas. There are different levels of souls. The Eishon neshamas shehem b'chinas ma b'madrege tachtenim. Those souls who are on a lower level of ma. There's a lower level. They get more concealed in the body and the shabamis. Yeah. In ma itself, there's levels. And shamas that are a higher level in ma, they do not get concealed as they manifest in the animal soul. The eir and neshama, who bizgalus yeser, and the divine and the light of the soul is more revealed. He feels a subject of divine, an inyan eliki, something that is divine, that is godly.
Even while he's in Shalosh Klipsat Meis.
He doesn't say that. I think he's not talking Shalosh Klipsat Meis now. I think he's talking now in general in Shamas. I'm not sure. I think so. B'zeh yesh. I don't know if the B'zeh is B'zeh. I think he's talking B'zeh and Shamas in general. Let's see. Let's see. And he's excited by it, and he's affected by it. Which means that immediately, first of all in time, he quickly taketh, right away, doesn't take time, he is excited in his mind by the greatness of God. And he sublimates himself and gets humbled to the divine ayin, to the bittul of eliki, b'nakalmeid, very easily. So quickly and easily. And bittul and the me'ach. And that's because the ma, the adam, within his soul, is in a higher level. However, this body, which is the animal soul, the natural soul, that are drawn through the taiva. What means taivus hazivuk da'aba v'ima?
No, because before he said the neshamas were from Yichud Zun.
I know that. So
And this is now from Yichud Ava.
This is parents pshita. The is parents pshita.
No, because they have a higher source. The neshamas are from Yichud Zun. Mashenker and Behema comes from Yichud.
yeah, that's what it probably means. So, yeah.
No. They're coming from a higher source.
Why does it say taiva?
This is what it says in the Indikanya, that the English Scottish.
Because in order for the chachma to be mashpia to the bina, which is hava, there has to be some sort of amshacha.
Where does it say about the zun? Let's go back there a minute. Oh, yeah.
That's what Miles concealed. We're going to assume
That's what their source. They have a higher. That's why when you elevate them, they have a higher source.
You're saying these are tremendously high souls, like Achi Berei, and those, the Gesh, those kind of.
No, not souls.
That's what we're talking
We're
about.
not talking about souls here.
Well, that's what we're talking about. Yeah?
He's talking about
And
Gufim of
those
Shabbos.
Achi.
Okay, let's read it and let's read it and
That's
let's.
the Bahamas we're talking about now.
Listen, we'll resolve it after we read it.
Versus the neshama.
Omnam Gufei Shu Nefesh Hamishim De Taivus Hazivuk Da'ava. Now the guf, which is a natural soul that is drawn by the taivus hazivuk dava through the desire of the union of Abba ve'ima, shenikra behema, which is called animal,
Which is a constant.
sheshar shemeichol is the klippus nega, which root in the hecholis, in the halls, corridors, chambers of klippus nega, who gasa b'yeser, he gasa b'yeser. Is excessively coarse. Meaning that it's filled with all these negative emotions, feelings, without any bittul hayesh klal, without any sublimation at all. And this soul, this air, the energy of the soul, doesn't have any connection to this coarse body and the natural soul. This is the first option. This is the first option. It is actually Ligrius. You'll see in a second. That even though from the soul's perspective, he's very much excited being in something that is ungodly, or poiled by Hazaz Gdela, and affects him, it moves him very deeply, it moves him very Hazaz Gdela, great movement, from his battle be'emes, and he's truly humbled and sublimated by it. It doesn't have any relationship. It doesn't touch at all the body. And when the body comes to Advar Taiva, it's something that's a real desire, a real Taiva. It's unable to conquer the spirit of the desire. Because the body is fundamentally coarse and thick. And the soul, even though it's so great and has that type of inspiration, has no connection with the body to conquer it, to rule and govern over the spirit of the taiva, of the desire. Like we see in various people, you see these two opposites, this paradox. The b'shah echas, 1 moment, 1 hour, 1 moment, who teiv legamri, he's good, completely good. B'shah beis hu lehepech legamri, and another moment, it's the exact opposite. This is the first. This is the Gerusa. That's the Eir.
That's it. That doesn't.
Yeah, the Eir is Eir. It's just the whole arichas, but that's the. We'll go back in a second. The goodness is coming from the soul. And it's true for that moment when he's that way, for that time period. For that, the Shah is expression hour, but Shah also can mean moment. It can mean period of time. So he's good for that period of time. It's true for that period of time. Because when he's awakened by it because of his soul, he's truthfully good. And the opposite is coming from the body. To the point, to the extent that even in times which are Eish Ratzon Maila, when it's auspicious hour above, like in the 10 days of Tshuva, between Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, when the source is close to the spark, as we learned this before in Aveda, the source is closer to the spark. So it's an Eish Ratzon, it's an auspicious time. There's a window, a window is opened of opportunity. There's less layers that block the divine from the world. At that time, he is very much excited in his soul, in a very true closeness for the time being, and a great awakening. Whether the Yisraelis, this awakening, is in order from is causes them to be close in Torah mitzvahs, meaning to Torah mitzvahs. Or the awakening is an awakening that affects a great type of tshuva that he does, return. So this is only for the time being, and not shaykh at all to the body and the animal soul. He said that earlier, if you remember, up here in chapter Reish Tzadik Ches.
Is that Asher Tevle?
Hold on. One second.
Not a good.
Sounds like it's Asher Tevle.
Certainly.
Yeah, on top of page Tofresh Daled, 604, he said there's people that they Yom Kippur they do their Veda, but then it's like never touch them because it never affected their Nefesh HaBamis. That he explained actually was dysfunctional number 2.
Why is that? Function number 2 is where there's too much iron by the kli. And here we're not doing it. We're saying there he didn't have Shuvah Torah because he didn't have the...
Okay, but the point is, okay, it doesn't matter. This is dysfunctional number 1, where the bottom line, what he said here is that the neshama, remember the neshama is in this case, and the is very revealed. That's what he said, first thing. Ma, it does not, he remains revealed, like he says, going back now to the higher levels of the Shem Ma, these type of people, that's what he's talking about as the first level. It's a very revealed soul. They easily get inspired, etc. But it's separate from the body. It's 2 different worlds. So the is the Neshama is Ayin, the Keli is Yesh, and they don't meet. And that's why there's times like this and times like that. That's the bottom line. The whole Arichas was really to explain what means Masala. What does it mean that it's concealed? Like, because it's now talking more practically with Neshama and Guf. So his point was that Neshama really doesn't get concealed by the animal soul or by the body. It's the Ma itself conceals itself, and therefore it's concealed there. Not like the sparks of Tohu, where those sparks do actually get concealed. Neshama does not get concealed. However, Neshama, even when it's in Shalosh Tupsat Meis, still retains its Eir. It doesn't explain what, but basically what it says in Tanya that in the Sirius Nefesh, it says that when it comes to a thing of this, something will wake him up. Where in Shalosh Tupsat Meis, there's nothing that's going to wake her up. The mitzvahs, unless someone did an Aved Rahman al-Islam and that does true. But that's a different thing. So Neshama is there, but that is somewhat of a, I would say, it's parenthetical. It's not, the bottom line is Neshama doesn't get concealed, even in the lowest, and then he goes back, but then there are those that are not as low, and the higher Shema, it's more revealed. I would say that Neshamas that are lower and get concealed are not this dysfunctional that he's saying here. Because they're the Neshama isn't revealed with That's probably option 2, or option 3 maybe. I don't know, we'll learn it. But in other words, because here the problem is that the air is there. But it's nothing to do with the goof. That's the thing here. Here's the strain. Not Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, the Keli, became like the air, so they're fine. Here, there's a disconnect. There's a dichotomy. That you have the neshama is strong
Also, it's like
and the guf is
the
strong.
keli became too much like the air. That's not the kavanah.
No, that's also, you said that earlier, that's like chanech and eliyahu. But there, it's also in tikkun, it's not that. But the keli becomes too much like the air and there's no air, is what I said, that your kippur, where you completely ignore the body. Like, if you broke the body. I mean, he's not saying that here. Bottom line here, the problem here is that the air is air and keli is keli, air and yesh, and they don't meet. And at times like this, times like that. Let me read the kitzur and kitzur v'yavayim madrega anal b'neshama lamata. Now he explains these levels above in the neshama below. The neshama the neshama and the natural soul is ma and ban, adam and behema. And neshama b'chinas ma'yi hi ayin be'etzem. Neshama is the level of ma, bittul, selflessness, and it's ayin be'etzem is fundamentally doesn't have itness and identity of its own. The yesh b'teva aliyah and has the nature to ascend, transcendence. Ima yesh of a nivdul mina etzem, even though it's separate from the etzem. Even though it's separate, as he said, distant from the kava, outside of the containers, but it's part of the etzem. In every soul, even though it gets concealed as it descends below, as it's drawn down below, and that's why it can manifest in the guf and nefesh ativis, because you see, the soul didn't conceal itself; it wouldn't be able to manifest.
Never be able to go on.
I don't think he said that inside the actual paper. Okay. Even when it goes down, it gets completely concealed. It's still air. It's still its nature is to radiate.
Oil is connected to that. Like
It's to Tohu, that the sparks of Tohu that get completely concealed. Because Shehi b'madregas al yen is the ma. Now he goes back, and when it's in the neshama from the higher levels of ma, even though it manifests in the physical, is still nevertheless a level of revelation. Get very excited by godliness. In the body and the natural soul, who gasbi yesed, are very coarse. And they have no relationship to one another. It's a great soul in a coarse body.
This is another thing. This is not part of the.
And even when he's excited in his soul from Torah mitzvahs and awakening of tshuva, and no relationship to his guf and nefesh habamis. Unfortunately, this is many of us like this. I don't know how great our souls are, but we have. You have an awakening of the soul, and it has nothing to do. It's not refining the body, and they don't meet. It's an air and a keli. It's a flame and a wick that are not meeting. It's the first problem.
But this is amazing that he says comes from the madregas al yenistama. So in other words, this problem is more by those neshamas that are higher.
Yeah. Because I said if they're lower, they don't have so much reveal in neshama. So, but obviously, if they're lower, they also have from time to time, but they also have no connection to the body.
Yeah.
Bottom line is that the body and the soul are not connected. He's saying even the air is intense. But okay, we'll stop here. Shin page 3, chapter 300. We did pages 608 through 610.